Leaden clouds gather over the eternal city, foreboding a significant event. Inside the majestic silence of the Sistine Chapel, 135 cardinals move like shadows past Michelangelo's immortal frescoes. The world holds its breath, awaiting a sign, the white smoke, symbol of a new pope's election. But this time, the atmosphere is imbued with something different, something elusive. Among the throng of influential prelates, a name begins to resonate, almost entirely unexpected. An African name, a conservative name, a name that echoes with silence, steadfastness, and unwavering faith. Robert Sarah. While most analysts and experts are betting on seasoned European cardinals, astute Vatican diplomats, or representatives of the Church's progressive wing, he remains in prayer. He doesn't campaign, give interviews, or vie for power, yet his presence is felt by all. There is something about him that causes unease, provokes discussions, divides opinions, and simultaneously inspires. Following the resignation of Benedict XVI and the election of Francis, the Catholic Church has been undergoing an era of profound change, and Pope Francis, despite his message of mercy and universal acceptance, recognizes that the Church needs strong roots, steadfastness, and voices unafraid to confront the challenges of the modern world. He himself has often spoken of Sarah as a man of deep spirituality and devotion to the Church. This very fact makes his candidacy impossible to ignore at the upcoming conclave. But why is an African cardinal, known for his modesty and restraint, gaining traction in an environment where Europeans have dominated for centuries? Why are his traditionalist views, often criticized by the Church's liberal wing, attracting more and more young Catholics? And perhaps the most unsettling question, is the world ready to accept a pope who seeks not applause but silence? The conclave is a complex interplay of symbols and secret decisions. While all eyes are fixed on the most obvious candidates, something larger may be unfolding behind the scenes. A movement of quiet faith, a response to the spiritual crisis gripping the West. This possibility could forever change the future of the Church. The next pope might not be who the world expects, but rather whom God has chosen in silence. And perhaps that name is Robert Sarah. Born in 1945 in a tiny Guinean village, he grew up without basic amenities, electricity, running water, or access to books. His parents were illiterate farmers. It seemed he was destined to repeat their fate, living a simple and unremarkable life. But God had other plans for Robert Sarah. At the age of 12, he asked to be admitted to a seminary. There was not even a Bible in his home, but there was faith, a faith that sprang forth in the quiet prayers of his mother and the dignity of his father's hard work. It was in poverty that he learned the true value of life's essentials. And it was there, deep in the African jungle, that one of the most remarkable figures in the 20th century Catholic Church began to emerge. Robert Sarah did not follow the conventional steps of a clerical career. He was not part of the European ecclesiastical elite, nor did he attend prestigious universities. Yet, at the age of 34, he was appointed a bishop by John Paul II, becoming the youngest in the world at that time. Later, Benedict XVI called him to Rome, and Francis kept him in that position. 3 popes, 3 different perspectives, and 1 cardinal who earned the respect of each. Pope Francis, representing a more pastoral and open approach, never overlooked the importance of Sarah's spiritual fortitude. He spoke of him as a man of deep prayer and courage, a shepherd carrying the weight of tradition but with a heart open to the poor, precisely as the Pope himself has always advocated. But how did this young African man, raised among palms and cornfields, find himself at the very heart of global Catholicism, and moreover, come to be considered one of Pope Francis's most likely successors? Perhaps the answer lies in his upbringing and his life's journey, a path founded not on ambition but on selflessness, not on the pursuit of power but on service. It is this authenticity that draws attention to him. While many ponder who the next Pope will be, Sarah's story already provides an answer to a much deeper question. Who is ready to lead with humility, courage, and in silence? In an era when many religious leaders use words to assert themselves, Robert Sarah distinguishes himself by his opposite, silence. But this is not an empty silence. It is a silence that speaks, that resists, that denounces not with shouts, but with prayer, while the world is engulfed in confusion. And it is precisely through this silence that he has become one of the most influential cardinals in the Catholic Church. When he was elevated to the cardinalate, many expected him to become more politicized, more diplomatic, more attuned to the rhetoric accepted in Rome. But he chose a different path. He published books that became global bestsellers, such as The Power of Silence, in which he asserts that God is silence, and it is in silence that he speaks to us. According to Sarah, the world's noise is a spiritual distraction, and his mission is to remind the Church that truth needs no applause, it only requires courage. This stance has even caught the attention of Pope Francis. Despite differences in style and approach, the Pope publicly acknowledged Sarah's spiritual depth. He even noted that, despite some disagreements, Sarah is a man of prayer who loves the Church. In times of widespread polarization, this speaks volumes. So why does this silence cause apprehension? In an era where everyone is expected to have an immediate opinion on every issue, Cardinal Sarah responds with contemplation. While many high-ranking church officials are concerned with their image and influence, he prefers spiritual retreats. In an age of heated debates about morality and doctrine on social media, he persistently reiterates, truth is immutable. For many, this sounds provocative, yet deep down, everyone understands that the Church needs shepherds who know how to listen, not just speak, to serve, not to show off. Shepherds who, in Pope Francis's words, smell of the sheep. Robert Sarah, despite the firmness of his traditional convictions, bears the mark of this simplicity and quiet service. In a world where everything seems fluid and rootless, Robert Sarah stands as an unshakable rock. He's a conservative cardinal in a church whose doctrines and beliefs are constantly questioned under the pressure of rapid and complex changes. Yet, Sarah remains steadfast, like an anchor in the turbulent sea of Catholicism, which is increasingly adapting to the currents of modernism. What does it mean to be a conservative in such an era? In a society where ideas, values, and traditions seem to melt, lose form, and transform by the minute, Sarah remains unyielding. In his seminal book, he wrote, "The world today is becoming increasingly liquid, as Bauman would put it. It is no longer capable of maintaining a solid structure, but the Church of Christ cannot be diluted." This reflection by Sarah is a direct critique of a world that, in his view, has lost its identity. We live in an age where everything is in constant motion: culture, politics, religion, all subject to transformation. Against this backdrop emerges a figure like Sarah, a man who does not bend to trends but resist them, offering a vision of Catholicism that might seem outdated to many, yet is deeply rooted in tradition and spirituality. Pope Francis, with his more pastoral and flexible approach, is often presented in contrast to figures like Sarah. While Francis preaches the necessity of a church that embraces the poor, the marginalized, and the outcast, Sarah is convinced that the true strength of the church lies in preserving the unchanging truth of Christ, regardless of external pressures. And although their approaches may differ, there is mutual respect between them. Francis acknowledges that Sarah does not merely defend dogmas, but affirms a commitment to church doctrine and the preservation of its fundamental principles. Robert Sarah is not against change as such. He believes in adaptation, but not in dilution. For him, the Church cannot lose itself in the torrent of rapid changes in the modern world. It must remain a beacon of stability and truth in a sea of uncertainties. He warns that if the Church yields to the pressures of the world, it risks losing its essence. Africa, with its diversity of cultures, traditions, and vibrant faith, is finally beginning to be heard at the very heart of the Catholic Church. But who is the chief representative of this quiet Africa, which for centuries remained on the periphery of Vatican debates and crucial decisions? Robert Sarah, the Cardinal from Guinea, is that powerful and relentless voice. He is not merely an African in Rome. He embodies Africa, carrying within him centuries of faith, martyrdom, resistance, and hope. In a church where Europeans dominated until recently, Sarah's rise represents more than just an appointment. It signifies a transformation in the balance of spiritual power, a quiet yet influential revolution that brings the strength of African faith to the forefront. Pope Francis, with his more inclusive and global pastoral vision, recognizes and supports the vitality of the Church in Africa. He himself has visited the continent multiple times, seeking to understand the needs and challenges facing African Catholics. For Francis, the Church cannot be a product of Western culture. It must be a universal church, speaking all languages, understanding all realities, and carrying Christ's message to peoples worldwide. Sarah, with his vision of a church firm in tradition, might seem to contrast with Francis's more inclusive style. However, both acknowledge Africa's importance and the pivotal role it plays in the future of the Catholic Church. So what does Robert Sarah's voice mean for the Church today? It is a reminder that the Church must reflect the realities of the entire world. It cannot remain a European or Western institution. It must be a global church with a strong presence on the African continent, carrying within its veins the richness of a deep and living spiritual tradition. By raising his voice against secularism and progressive ideas that threaten to undermine the Church's foundations, Sarah becomes a defender of African faith. He represents a faith that does not succumb to the currents of modernism, but remains firm, like a tree rooted in ancient soil. This African cardinal is not only a figure challenging the modern world's complexities, but also a bridge between the West and Africa, between different continents and cultures that form the universal church. He brings an African perspective that is fundamental to the Church's future, a voice that reminds us that the Church is truly universal and that Africa is not just a spectator, but a living and dynamic force in Christ's mission. In the annals of the Catholic Church, certain figures stand out whose relationships form a complex tapestry of spirituality, doctrine, and power. In this context, the the triumvirate of Robert Sarah, Pope Francis, and Benedict XVI, offers an example of a delicate balance where perspectives intersect, clash, and at times harmoniously complement each other. Amidst these dynamic processes, Sarah emerges as a symbol of resistance, emphasizing the necessity of preserving fidelity to Catholic traditions during a period when the Church faces challenges both from within and without. The change in pontificate in 2013, when Benedict XVI yielded the throne to Francis, marked a pivotal moment for the Catholic Church. Benedict XVI's resignation, whose papacy was characterized by a push towards a more conservative and orthodox Catholicism, signaled a return to fundamental doctrines in an era when change seemed inevitable. His departure opened the door for a new era, defined by the pontificate of Francis, a pope who urged the Church to focus its attention on the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable populations, and to foster rapprochement with the modern world. Before Francis's passing, Robert Sarah and Pope Francis represented two poles of the spectrum of opinions. While Francis aimed for a more inclusive, flexible, and open to dialogue church with modernity, Sarah acted as a staunch defender of preserving dogmas and Catholic traditions. His rejection of modernity, particularly on matters of morality and doctrine, led to constant disagreements with Francis's pontificate. Nevertheless, this did not preclude mutual respect. Sarah always held deep reverence for Francis, despite significant differences in their views. Both recognized that the ultimate goal of the Church lay in fidelity to its divine purpose, even if the paths to achieving that goal might differ. Following Francis's death, the questions he raised remain open. The Church must decide whether it will continue on the path of inclusivity and pastoral service that he championed, or return to the more conservative and traditional positions that Sarah has always defended. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. Francis's legacy will be remembered as that of a pope who sought to transform the Church, making it more accessible and merciful, but also, in many aspects, more polarizing. Currently, following the passing of Pope Francis, the Catholic Church faces a pivotal question: who will be the next pope? Among numerous candidates, the name of Cardinal Robert Sarah, an African and a conservative, is being discussed with particular interest. The idea that he might lead the Catholic Church is not merely speculation. What if he is indeed elected? What would be the consequences for the Church and for the world? Pope Francis's death has created uncertainty, not only in the Vatican, but throughout the entire Catholic community. Francis's pontificate, marked by a pastoral and inclusive approach, left a legacy of love, mercy, and dialogue with the modern world. However, his rule also sparked disagreements, especially with figures like Robert Sarah, who not only questioned his reforms, but also opposed many of them. The main question today is whether the Church, after Francis's death, will take a more conservative path. And what if Cardinal Robert Sarah leads that movement? Robert Sarah's name is already being mentioned as a possible successor to Francis, and his ascent to lead the Church would be a historic event. This prospect elicits both enthusiasm and apprehension. Sarah, with his firm stance on preserving Church traditions, could represent a departure from the reforms proposed by Francis, but also a reaffirmation of the fundamental tenets of the Catholic faith. This could lead to a rethinking of the Church's mission, especially in an era when the modern world seems so distant from traditional Catholic principles, Sarah is convinced that the Church must remain a reliable refuge for traditional teachings, protected from the pressures of social and political demands. He is a staunch advocate for traditional liturgy, reverence for liturgical practices, and above all, the preservation of the Church's fidelity to its original dogma. His vision of the Church, often viewed as an opposition to Francis's pontificate, is centered on maintaining what he considers the true essence of the Catholic faith. However, there is yet another aspect that makes the question of Robert Sarah's election as Pope particularly interesting: his potential role as the first Black Pope. Sarah, a native of Guinea, could become the first African Pope in the Church's history. His rise would be a true revolution, not only for the Church but for the entire world. It would signify a symbolic global transformation, reflecting the growing influence of the Church in Africa and the significance of the African voice on the world stage. Furthermore, the election of an African Pope would be a response to the burgeoning presence of Catholicism on the African continent, where the Catholic faith is rapidly spreading, while in Europe and other parts of the Western world, religion is experiencing decline.